All right, hello everybody. Today I've got something, should be fairly short. I read this weekend, finished it this morning, The Skylark of Space. This is the first book in Doc Smith's Skylark series, the first of four. It was followed by three sequels. You know, it's one of those things where as I was going through the Lensman series, there were a good number of comments that were like, hey, you should check out the Skylark series, because that was Doc Smith's kind of earlier work. It's been called I forget the word they used to describe it, but it's like the very first kind of real space opera kind of thing. And I figured it would be fun to go check it out, and so I went and found it and read through it. And I read. It's funny. It has a very similar publishing history to like Triplanetary, right? Triplanetary, the first Lensman book, kind of which originally wasn't a Lensman book. It was a serialized book that was in I think Astounding Stories, maybe. But it was serialized back in 1934, and then later on in like I think 1940 up until 1948, I believe Doc Smith added a bunch to it in order to kind of fit it into the existing Lensman series, which he had been working on already, and he wanted Triplanetary to kind of to fit into that universe. So, Skylark, or rather, the Skylark of Space, was serialized back in 1928, so a little bit earlier than Triplanetary. If you want to look it up, it was in, I believe, Amazing Stories between August and October of 1928. That'd be Volume 3, numbers 5, 6, and 7. And then, similarly to Triplanetary, Doc Smith added a bunch of stuff to it and expanded it for 1946, like, book edition. So, where Lensman started out as kind of a fairly simple cops and robbers story and later developed into something a little bit more nuanced and complex, Skylark, or rather, the Skylark of Space, is even simpler and more straightforward. It's even pulpier than the Lensman series was. I feel like I'm not going to be spoiling too much with a little bit of plot synopsis, so let's try this out. Our main character is Richard Seaton. He is a scientist studying rare metals. He discovers in a sample of platinum this metal that's called X throughout the book. It's kind of some unknown metal. It's hinted at being related to platinum chemically, but further down on the periodic table kind of thing. What this metal X does is it enables the perfect conversion of copper into pure energy. And that energy can be directed in a variety of ways. Most of the time in this book, it's directed in one of two ways, either for propulsion or for explosive power. He works with a friend of his who is like kind of like a. So Seaton is kind of one of those very like Doc Smith characters. He's a really good scientist, and he's really fast with a gun, and he's very athletic, and he's kind of got a little bit of that Superman syndrome that we see in a lot of the Doc Smith books. But he also has a friend who isn't quite as accomplished a scientist, but is extremely rich, inventor, engineer, etc., named, believe it or not, Martin Crane. So if you ever watched the TV show Frasier, you'll be like, wait, what? But basically, Crane helps Seaton develop, or at least wants to help Seaton develop this X into something useful, and their first idea of what to do with it is spaceflight. Now, there is a guy who worked at the same place where Seaton works at the beginning of the story. Once Seaton discovers X, he quits, and through a series of goofy things, he manages to get that X along with him, kind of thing. But this guy named Mark Duquesne, something like that, Duquesne, I believe is how it's spelled. At least that's how I wrote it down. So if I wrote it down wrong, I did. Anyway, this guy is kind of like the ultimate amoral scientist, and his idea is to basically get rid of Seaton and Crane, monopolize X, and use it to build power plants and make himself a bajillionaire, basically. In the early part of the book, he kind of him and the people that he's working with hatch several plots to get rid of Seaton, get rid of Crane, steal X, etc., etc., etc. I won't give too many details on that, but it's it's not really that much of a spoiler. But what he ends up doing that actually kind of pushes the story into the next phase is he kidnaps Seaton's fiance. So basically, it's like, well, crap, we've got to chase them down. So we better get started. They chase Duquesne. They catch him. They visit a couple of planets, and 99% of the action happens on the second planet. But I just wanted to say one little thing about the first planet. And it's not a spoiler because it's not mentioned anywhere else in the book. So, like, they get to this first planet, and there's like this being that's like, you are an unevolved mind, and therefore you must be destroyed, kind of thing. And it was like, oh, they found Edor, right? But no, I mean, there's no. I mean, maybe it was kind of like an idea he had in the back of his head, but I just thought it was funny how it was like, we have mind powers. It's like, oh, I see what you're doing here. Something that he developed later on, obviously. Anyway, they land on the second planet. They kind of end up getting captured. They run out of copper in the chase, and so they have to like find more copper, and that's why they're kind of looking at all these different planets. They find the one planet that they think has copper. They end up getting captured, sort of. There's a little bit of intrigue. It's not particularly like deep or confusing. It's pretty quick. It's dealt with pretty quickly. They end up inserting themselves into a war between two factions on the planet. Minor intrigue, then lots and lots of action, basically. Gigantic fight, huge spherical spaceship destroying other battleships, kind of thing. It's an action-packed pulp story, not like a sit back and ponder, philosophical science story. Fair enough. One thing that I want to mention is that if you thought that like the romantic parts of the Lensman series were like weird and kind of like what? There's actually more of that. There's actually a lot of that in this book. I don't know. Smith seems to have this very idealized and like immediate idea of how like romance between human beings works, and it's funny enough that there's this underlying kind of subplot thread going throughout the whole book about this. But then in the extended version that came out in 1946, there's an entire chapter dedicated to basically a marriage between some of the characters, and it's like, was this necessary? Did we need this here? Does this belong here? It was like, I enjoyed the whole book except that one chapter. I kept wanting to just be like, turn the page, because it's just so like, I mean, like hyper idealized isn't quite the right word, but it's like so. I don't know. Something about it, like just is like, this is silly, kind of. There's a silliness to it, like almost a childishness to it. That I think is pretty funny, and then the really funny thing that happens in the marriage chapter is that they get like a marriage certificate, and like it says, this is also legal in Washington D.C. It's like, what the what? Maybe, I don't know. They even mentioned in the book, they're like, yeah, we're gonna have to take this to a court. Obviously, it's kind of funny. So after they win the war for the good guys on this planet, they return back to Earth. Duquesne escapes to be a thorn in their side again in another book, I assume. And yeah, that's kind of the book. I mean, it kept me turning pages, right? I'm not going to call it deep or like complex. It's even pulpier than Triplanetary was. It's fun and engaging, but it doesn't really ask any questions, and the reader doesn't really need to ask any questions. It's just here's the stuff that's happening. It's pretty basic there. The characters are, to be fair, it's not a very long period of time that the book takes place over. The characters are relatively static, kind of with mild Superman syndrome. Not as much as, late Kimball Kinnison, like late game Kimball Kinnison, not late as in dead, but late as in like in the later stories, where he's just like, I can do everything. But a little bit of that. The science aspects are mostly pretty vague, but they're occasionally intriguing and interesting. Sometimes there's a little tidbit of something fun and interesting from a scientific perspective in there. It's not just that this X metal makes it so that you can immediately make copper turn into energy. You need like an additional field or something, and they're talking about like ultrafine structure, which I know fine structure is a thing, but I wonder whether. Okay, so I'm an atomic physicist. Fine structure is a thing. There are sub levels to like the energy structure of the electron in a hydrogen atom, right? And there's even something called hyperfine structure. And I don't know whether the phrase hyperfine structure was in common use back in the late 1920s. It may have been, but Smith ends up calling something ultrafine structure, which might be... Because believe it or not, scientific terms don't just like appear out of the ether and everybody knows what they are, right? Like a magneto-optical trap is the name that everybody agreed on after a bunch of people were doing something that was effectively a magneto-optical trap, but they called it something else. So, I mean, maybe this is a real term that was used back then, but like he said ultrafine structure in the book, and I'm like, is that hyperfine structure or is this just something he made up? I don't know. It's vague enough that it doesn't really matter. Fair enough. The book is fairly short. It's very action-packed. It's a fun, engaging read. There's a lot of Smith-style goofy slang back and forth. You remember how he kept... well, maybe you don't, but one of the things that he kept talking about in the Lensman series, like something 15 decimals. In this one, it's the proverbial 19 decimals. And... not decibels, decimals. And the funny thing is that the first time they say it, they call it the proverbial... No. It's not even that they call it the proverbial 19 decimals. It's that Dorothy, who is Seaton's fiance, tells him that she believes him to his beloved 19 decimals or something like that. Not beloved, but like to his well-known 19 decimals. And it's like that was the first time it was mentioned in the whole book. This is not a character. This is not an aspect of his character that we've been introduced to, but here it is. And she's like, "Yeah, you're always talking about your 19 decimals," and it's like suddenly it appears like 7 more times in the story, and it like doesn't appear in the first half. It's very weird, but we get a lot of that goofy kind of Smith style slang. The next book, is called Skylark 3, which I believe is because it's the third constructed ship named Skylark. They have their first Skylark, and then in the other planet they have to rebuild it, so that would, I guess, hypothetically be Skylark 2, although it's not referred to as such. So the next book is probably about them rebuilding Skylark again, even bigger and better, and then some adventures there. So, it's something that I will probably check out when I have some free time, but I'm not in a hurry. I don't think... obviously these books aren't going anywhere, so, it's not a big deal. And I liked this book, but I would say that I didn't feel like, oh, I gotta definitely get the next one right now. So we'll see where it goes, and I'll hop into that at some point eventually. What I do have plans for this week, or it might end up being early next week, is I picked up a copy of the Andromeda Strain, which I really liked the book. I thought the movie was a disaster. At least that's how I remember perceiving it when I was 17 or 16 when I read the book and saw the movie. But Crichton is one of those authors that I read a lot of back when I was younger, and I haven't looked at him in a long time, so I thought I would maybe do a couple of Crichton books in the near future. And so I figured the obvious thing to do would be start with Jurassic Park. But no, I'm going to start with the Andromeda Strain, because I think I liked that book a little bit better, honestly. But then again, I haven't read it in 20 years, so maybe it's not as good as I thought. But I thought that'd be a fun thing to do. I'm going to look at that. I'll probably cover Magician Master eventually, but I don't want to just hurry into it. If you saw my review of Magician Master and it made you want to Magician Apprentice, and it makes you want to check that book out, I want to give you a little time before I go in, because there's going to have to be a little bit of spoilers of Magician Apprentice at the start of my plot summary for Magician Master. There's just not really a way around it. Anyway, I might also, I'm going to try to do something else to talk about things I've learned from writing my first novel as well. And that'll hopefully be 3 videos this week, so that'd be nice. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, you know what to do. Links in the description as usual. And, hope you have a good week, and I will see you next time.